Welcome in this third and last installment of this Godzilla retrospective. In the very first video we had covered the Showa era, the birth of Godzilla and its glory days during the 60s and less glory days during the 70s. And then we did on the second installment, in the second video, the SA era, which was a pretty interesting attempt to give a new orientation to the King of Monsters. And so with this third and last installment, we are going to enter in what we call the Millenium era, which basically lasts from the end of the 90s until mid-2000. And we will also cover all the American attempt to remake Godzilla, to transform the King of the Monsters into a Hollywood hit. And that's actually exactly what we are going to start with for this video, with the 1998 Godzilla by Roland Emmerich. So Roland Emmerich, a German director who moved to the US in the 80s, who did which kind of specialized in science fiction. He did Moon 44, he did Universal Soldiers, and he had a big hit with his scriptwriter Dean Devlin with Independence Day. So this big blockbuster with the president of the US destroying invading aliens and saving the day, basically. And because of this success, he was able to kind of choose his next project, which ended up being this Godzilla. The idea of having a Godzilla made in Hollywood, made in the US, had actually been in the air for a very long time. That was kind of the thinking that the executives at Toho had for quite a while. They were thinking that at some point the US should take the lead. They should get the franchise, get get Godzilla for themselves, and then make it their own. Of course, for them that was a good financial situation. They would get a lot of money from Hollywood studio in order to do that. But it also betrays a thinking which is, unfortunately, in my opinion, prevalent in many executives in the film industry in Asia, and also in many fans' thinking, which is Hollywood basically does things better than any other film industry. And so for those people, for those executives, for those artists working in the film industry, the local film industry in Asia, having their films picked up by Hollywood is like some kind of legitimation. It makes it seems like a confirmation that what they did was good, and Hollywood is going to make it even better. And I completely disagree with this kind of thinking. I don't understand why there is this need to have this kind of legitimization by Hollywood. I don't think the fact that Hollywood remakes this film is a positive thing. I don't think they need to be confirmed by Hollywood. They need to be confirmed through ceremonies like the Oscar or this kind of film awards, these kind of things. These films made in Asia are as good as they get by themselves. They don't need some kind of confirmation from Hollywood that they are good. And we don't need, as fans, this kind of confirmation. And especially because when they usually remake those films in the US, well, in most of the case, they end up being much less good than their original counterpart. And that's a perfect illustration here with this Godzilla 1998. Before I delve into the film itself, it's also worth mentioning that for a long time there was this idea, as I say, to have a Hollywood version of Godzilla. And so there had been several directors who had been associated to this project. And in the early mid-80s, if I remember correctly, there was one who was actually quite close to make it to completion, which was Steve Miner. He had a script written by Fred Decker. Fred Decker, who is a long-time partner from scriptwriter Shane Black, who was also the director of the not very good Robocop 3, which I had the pleasure to see in theaters back in the day. Well, lucky me. Anyway, so this project was quite on a good track in order to be made, but at the end, as you know, they didn't really achieve. They didn't manage to make a film out of it, and so then the project kept going from studio to studios, from director to directors, and at the end of the day, it's Roland Emmerich who finally managed to make it and have it released in 1998. So what's in this American version of Godzilla? So we have some nuclear testing made by the French authority in 1995, which was indeed the case. The French government did some nuclear testing in French Polynesia in 1995. That was a big there was a big uproar back then in France and elsewhere in the world about this kind of test. So they are using this as a base for this 1998 version. Those nuclear tests, of course, they wake up some kind of giant beast, Godzilla, who go to New York and will start to make a mess over there. Well, first, well, there can be already some comments being made on the fact that they have decided to use the French nuclear test as the awakening signal for Godzilla. Obviously, it's not that surprising because they can't really use the original Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs in order to have Godzilla come back. First, because it's a long time ago now, and of course because it would pinpoint the responsibility of it to the American, which in such a blockbuster made in Hollywood is a problem. And so just there, fundamentally, just this, while it does make sense, it shows how it betrays the original material right from the go. Not surprising, but it shows that you can't really expect Hollywood to do something that great with such a material. Having said that, the introduction, the initial setting for the film is actually quite well made. You are curious enough. There is some tension. The atmosphere is pretty interesting, and so as long as it's about teasing what is going to happen, introducing the characters, these kind of things, the film does actually quite okay. But things go downhill as soon as Godzilla is in New York and he starts to walk around the streets and stuff. It does have some spectacular elements sometimes, because indeed there is this American quality when it comes to special effects. But even there, it's a bit uneven. But in general, they are fairly good. But the film completely lacks any themes or message, any personality of its own, and that's the big problem. The new Godzilla design is basically a slightly changed version of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it lacks any personality, I think, and he's just trying to survive and escape the American military porn that Roland Emmerich is showcasing here, with a lot of helicopters and tanks and stuff like this. It gets boring quite quickly, unfortunately, and it makes even worse. And it's made even worse by the characters. All the characters are either annoying, either just badly acted. The lead in the film is Matthew Broderick, who is an okay actor, actually. I kind of liked him in War Games and a few other films he did, but here he's quite empty, transparent. And there are some other secondary actors who are supporting actors who are not good at all. I think, for example, of the girlfriend of Matthew Broderick. I mean, she's a complete miscast. She's a calamity. Of course, her character is not very interesting in the first place, but she's really bad. And it's very rare for me to say that actors are really bad. I actually have a fairly high tolerance of bad performance, but here, oh my god, it was atrocious. And many of the characters are really annoying, like the mayor and his assistant, which are obviously based on a very famous American film critics. It's not pleasant to follow all these people, and you don't really care about what they are going to do and if they survive. The only one who is a bit more interesting, it's actually Jean Reno, the French actor, who has a face who is always a bit different from the generic American cinema face. So it's nice to have him here, and he brings a little bit of comedy side in a way. So he's a welcome addition in the film, but it's not enough, obviously, to make it worth a watch. And there are a lot of things which are disappointing. For example, the music by David Arnold, who did some great stuff for his Pierce Brosnan James Bond, who did some great stuff actually in his collaboration with Roland Emmerich before. His soundtrack for Stargate is really good. Independence Day also, he did some pretty good stuff. But here in Godzilla, it's really disappointing. There is nothing really which sticks in his films or in its composition, and that's very disappointing. As I said, the special effects are also, while in general good, sometimes slightly disappointing as well. And there is a lack of originality of theme. As I say, the ending is basically trying to do Jurassic Park with a raptor scene in a bigger scale, and that's pretty much it. So it's a film which doesn't manage to have its own identity, and which ends up being a very generic, very average American blockbuster. Many Godzilla fans consider that it is the worst Godzilla ever made. I actually don't think so. I think some of the Godzilla from the 70s are worse than that, but it's certainly at the bottom of the barrel. And so if you are a fan of Godzilla in general, and if you want specifically to watch the good Godzilla, clearly this one is not one of them. There is a good thing though for with the making of this American Godzilla. First, because the film didn't really do a killing at the box office, and so the idea of having a sequel was quickly forgiven and cancelled. But it also reawakened the pride of the Japanese film industry, and seeing the disaster that was this 1998 version, the Japanese decided to restart a new cycle of Godzilla film, and so we got in 1999 Godzilla 2000, directed by Takao Okawara. And so that's the film which starts the Millennium cycle, this new cycle of Godzilla films in Japan. The story is actually pretty basic. It's going back to the roots in a way, with Godzilla coming to town, coming to Japan. At the same time, there is also a weird UFO which has appeared in Japan and which is being studied. And we are going to discover that this UFO is part of extraterrestrial race who wants to dominate the Earth. So kind of going back to the 1954 Ishiro Honda version, and also adding a few elements from the 1960s part of the saga, with this kind of extraterrestrial presence on the Earth, but with a tone which is quite serious, with a photography which is a bit dark. So it's trying to really make it a fairly serious version, not the pop and colored version of the 60s, which is more in line with the general atmosphere, mood that there was in the end of the 90s, early 2000s, with films like Matrix and stuff like that. So this dark atmosphere that was on all the the film industry all over the world. So for this new Godzilla, they have once again improved, if made the costume, the design of Godzilla evolve a bit, and so this version is even slightly more aggressive than the one from the S.A. era. I really like the S.A. era design, but the Millenium design is pretty good too. It's really a nice Godzilla, very dark, very aggressive, and which is a pleasure to see after the failure that was the new redesign of Godzilla for the Roland Emmerich version. So on that part, this Godzilla 2000 is a joy to watch, especially also because the special effects are really well made. They have done a very good job. Mostly practical, once again with a suit and things like that, but they start to include CGI as well, which is at that point unavoidable in the saga. I mean, they had at some point to start incorporating this kind of technology. Of course, back then in Japan it was not at the same level as the US, so the quality of these CGIs are hit and a miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's quite ugly. They were in the early stage of this technology for them, so you have to be a bit forgiving on some of them. But in general, I would say the special effects scenes are fairly well made. The new Godzilla is pretty cool. On the new kaiju, so they bring a new kaiju here in order to confront Godzilla. This one is not bad, but I don't think it really left a strong impression in the memory of any fans. It's basically a mix between the Rancor and Alien. Why not? It works, but it's certainly not the most inspired kaiju that we got from the Godzilla saga. There is enough also work being made on the different characters who are kind of the usual kind of characters we got from the Godzilla series, with a scientist, a military, journalist. So this kind of characters we have seen many times, but the job is done fairly well here. They are humanized enough, they are developed enough so that you care a minimum to what they do. You are not going to be completely involved in what they are doing, but at least you will care a minimum in order to see what happens to them. And there is also one good thing on that aspect, on the casting aspect, which is the presence of Hiroshi Abe. Hiroshi Abe now is a big star in Japan. Back then he was already going in this direction. He was growing in popularity. He's an actor I really like, who actually started in Hong Kong cinema of all things. Back then he was not really good actually, but he has grown to become one of the most interesting and most successful Japanese actor ever. And it's really a pleasure to have him here, because he has a charisma, he has a presence which is certainly higher than his counterparts in the film, and so each time he is on the screen, that's a joy to watch, and especially near the end when he screams Godzilla, and that's great to see. He's a really welcome presence, and it helps make the film slightly more interesting. But so all in all, it's a good attempt to bring Godzilla in the 2000s, to make something more modern and to try to conquer a new audience. So a good try. It's not the best Godzilla ever, far from it, more like somewhere in the middle if you want to do a ranking, but it was a good way to kickstart a new Godzilla series. And kickstart a new Godzilla series it did, because we got another Godzilla the year after, which is Godzilla Vs Megaguirus, directed by Masaki Tezuka. And here we see what would be the Millenium series, what would be the orientation of the Millenium series, which is actually the complete opposite of what they did during the SA era. So if you remember the SA era, there was the specificity of it was that there was a continuity from film to film. What happened to one film had consequences on the other, and so it moved on that. That's really the big specificity of the SA era. And so for the Millennium era, they chose to do the complete opposite of that. And so there is absolutely no connection from one film to another. It goes even further than that, because they chose to basically cherry pick what part of the Godzilla saga they want to consider official in each film, and then they build around that. So it means that each of the Godzilla of the Millennium series is a one-off case with its specific universe, its specific alternative Japan. And that's what makes the Millennium series interesting in a way, because they try things which are quite different from what we got in the previous installment, in the previous eras, being the Showa or the SA. And so that's what happens with this Godzilla vs Megaguirus, in which we have a recreation of the events of the original 1954 Godzilla by Ishiro Honda. So it's actually quite nice to see those iconic scenes being remade in a modern version. And now the capital of Japan is in Osaka, and they are doing different scientific tests in order to find a way to get rid of Godzilla. And doing one of those tests, which include some kind of black hole technology, they actually bring some kind of prehistoric monster, which turns out to be this Megaguirus. And of course, we will have a huge confrontation between Godzilla and this new kaiju. So once again, here we have the same kind of design, the same design we had for Godzilla 2000. We have the same mix of practical special effects with a miniature, with the costume suit for Godzilla, but also incorporated quite a few CGI, which are a bit like the one from Godzilla 2000. I mean, this film has been made just 1 year after, so the technology didn't change that much. So once again here, the CGI are hit on a miss, but in general, the result is quite good on the screen when it comes to special effects. We also have what we can expect from the Japanese Millennium series, with human characters who are decent and fairly interesting, if not really that much involving, but they are developed enough for you to be interested in what happens. We lose Hiroshi Abe though, of course, because he was, spoiler alert, killed in the previous film, so that's a big loss. But one of the good things I like, and I already said it in the previous SA era video, is that the humans have a machine here, some kind of spaceship called the Griffin, in order to fight with Godzilla. So that makes them less passive, and they are able to be more involved in the fight against Godzilla. And that's something which I always enjoy more, rather than just having the human characters look at Godzilla and say, oh, we can do anything. I'm not too fond of that aspect of the series. So as soon as the human have ways to fight back, I always find it more interesting. And so they have included it here in this Godzilla vs Megaguirus, and that's a good thing in my book. The new kaiju, so Megaguirus, is some kind of a giant, prehistoric, very spiky butterfly, I guess. In a way, it's a bit similar to what they did with the evil Mothra in Batra, which appears in the Mothra vs Godzilla of the SA era. It's a bit this kind of concept. So a giant insect which fights with on a flying insect which fights with Godzilla. I think the design is pretty good, but in a way it's not that innovative or that original. So that's a bit the limitation. I think it works for the film, but it's not enough to make it that memorable, to be honest. But there is one very good point in this new version, in this second film from the Millennium era, which is the choice of the composer with Michiru Oshima. So Michiru Oshima, she worked mostly in anime and video games, if I remember correctly, and she worked on a few of the Millennium era Godzilla, and she did a great job. I think she is. I'm going to get some flack, I guess, for that, but I prefer her composition to what Akira Ifukube did. Of course, I'm not saying Akira Ifukube sucks. he did some great composition. I mean, he is the author of the iconic Godzilla theme. He did some great stuff for the death of Godzilla in Godzilla vs Destroyer. Of course, he's a great composer, and he did some great stuff for the Godzilla saga, but I'm really in love with the composition of Michiru Oshima on the Millennium Godzilla films. In this one, she's using a bit the Werner Herrmann approach, a mix between the birds and Psycho in a way. Each time there is this mini MechaGodzilla. And she also brings a new theme for Godzilla, which I really love, which I use actually quite often in the video I make that shows how much I love it. So I think it's a very welcome addition to the saga, and it really helps to elevate the film slightly higher, even if I think she will do even better when it comes to her composition with the next Godzilla. So this Godzilla vs Megaguirus, I think, is a nice addition to the corpus of Godzilla. It's certainly not the best, but it has enough good stuff for you to have a good time watching it. There are also some interesting ideas, like when you see Shibuya being submerged by water. There is a bit of this post-apocalyptic vibe, which is always interesting when you are familiar with the places. So yeah, a nice film. Not the greatest, but still a very pleasant Godzilla film to watch. So now we go to the third movie from the Millennium era, which is Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monster All-Out Attack. So a pretty long name, made in 2001 by Shusuke Kaneko. Shusuke Kaneko, if you are familiar with the world of kaiju or the world of Japanese cinema, you certainly know that he is the author behind the revival of Gamera, the giant atomic turtle, which was the big opponent of Godzilla, produced by the Daiei, and they made a new series of Gamera in the second half of the 90s, 3 films, which are, in my opinion, the very best kaiju film that Japanese cinema ever made. They are really, I mean, they are great. I really love those Gamera films. They are must watch. I think I already said it actually in my top, my favorite 10 Japanese film. I have the second Gamera in them. I really love those films, and obviously they were quite big success. They were praised by many fans and audience, and so it made sense for Toho to decide to hire Shusuke Kaneko and to ask him to bring his magic to the Godzilla series. And so it happened with this third film, which I'm going to use the acronym used by most fans, which is JMK. So it will be easier this way. And so indeed, Shusuke Kaneko with this film really tried to do things differently compared to the other films from the Godzilla saga. So we have Godzilla being Godzilla, so he's a force of destruction who appears and who is going to destroy Japan, and in order to avoid this unfortunate fate, the human tried to resurrect 3 guardians of the earth, which are Barugon, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. And through these 3 kaiju, there is a hope for humanity to be saved. So having Godzilla back to its evil nature is not a bad thing, and actually that's what has been kind of tried from each new approach for the series. I mean, in the SA era, that's what they tried to do. When they started the Godzilla series with this Millenium era, that's what they tried to do. So it's a classic way to restart a series and to try to always connect it to its root, to its original 1954 version. So nothing really that original here. The aspect which is more original is the kind of spiritual way that Shusuke Kaneko has brought. He already did a bit of that in the Gamera trilogy, so it's not that surprising that he tries to do something similar here. And it's an interesting attempt, which a lot of fans actually love. A lot of Godzilla fans consider JMK to be one of the very best Godzilla films. Unfortunately, I'm not on this page. I think it's an interesting attempt by Shusuke Kaneko, but I think ultimately it fails. It fails because he's trying to go too much against the legacy of the original Godzilla saga. And when I'm saying that, it's through the choice of King Ghidorah as some kind of a divinity wanting to protect Earth. I mean, King Ghidorah in the Godzilla mythology has always been like the ultimate nemesis of Godzilla. He's the one who is able to beat Godzilla. He's really the big bad guy for the end. And so to have transformed him here into a symbol of good, I find it too hard to swallow. I can't. I don't believe it. And I think his design also doesn't help, because he has a very aggressive, evil design. And so when he's used in this function here, I just cannot believe it. I cannot accept it, and that throw me off. And for me, that's the ultimate failure of this JMK. There are also other aspects which are unfortunately a bit underwhelming, and that is the special effects. The special effects are not that great. There are many times where they look a bit rudimentary, and that's especially surprising, because in the 2 previous installments, even if sometimes there were some iffy CGI, in general it was really good quality. Here it's not that convincing in many scenes, and obviously that's a problem for a film like a Godzilla. The same goes for the music by Ko Otani, who was the composer of the Gamera trilogy, and we did a great job on the Gamera trilogy, but here once again it's a bit uninspired. And so if you add all these things together, I think it's a film which is really worth watching, because it really tries to do something different, and that's really to the credit of the film. But in my opinion, it doesn't succeed. So it's a curiosity, but not a great Godzilla for me. And indeed, JMK was not a commercial success in Japan, and quite logically, the Toho decided not to ask him to continue doing a Godzilla film, and instead they hired back Masaki Tezuka, so the director from Godzilla Vs Megaguirus, and in 2002 he made Godzilla against MechaGodzilla. If you remember the second video, I was very enthusiastic about the way the SA era used MechaGodzilla. And basically they do the same in this Millennium era. So MechaGodzilla is used as a mecha by the humans in order to fight against Godzilla. They are using the skeleton, the bones of the original Godzilla who have been killed during the Oxygen Destroyer ending in 1954, and so they build a new mecha from there, which becomes MechaGodzilla, in order to fight with the original, the new Godzilla who appears in this version. And we follow the main character with the pilot of the MechaGodzilla, who was a trauma linked to the destruction brought by Godzilla, and so was also our own psychological distress and problems to deal with, and so that leads to obviously big confrontations with Godzilla. And so, as I said, the SA era MechaGodzilla I thought was great, and I think this Millennium version is great as well. No surprise there. The fact that we have, so there is a good part of the film feels a bit like a military film in a way, when you have the training of the character in order to become the best pilot. You have this kind of a bit of macho atmosphere with the other military people, these kind of things. It's not very original, but it's well made enough for you to be interested in the character. The actress is quite pretty, but she's not the best actress either, I think. But seeing her going through all this process and having also this trauma linked to Godzilla helps to make her interesting enough for us to watch. So there is enough involvement in what she does through this process, and that's to the benefit of the film. But obviously what makes this MechaGodzilla, this new MechaGodzilla, this Millennium MechaGodzilla good is really the improvement when it comes to the special effects. And so the two big fights between Godzilla and MechaGodzilla are really amazing. They are beautiful to watch, very inspired thanks to all the different weapons that MechaGodzilla has. The special effects are top-notch. We have the comeback of Michiru Oshima at the music, and as I said, she did even better on this film, and so her music fits perfectly with the action, and so it's a joy to watch those scenes, those special effects scenes between MechaGodzilla and Godzilla. And so yeah, it's not, it has the limitation of the Millennium era Godzilla films in the sense that as they are all one-off and they are usually not really connected to the other, you don't really have that much involvement, and it's fairly to the point in a way. But that's, so in a way that's its weakness, but it's also its strength, because there is nothing which are not needed for this specific story. So it goes to the point, and you have exactly what you can expect for such a show. And so once again, this new MechaGodzilla iteration is a great watch. It's a great watch, yeah, a great film to watch, very enjoyable. And so yeah, MechaGodzilla, I guess, has become the lucky charm of the Godzilla series at this point. So I say that the specificity of the Millennium era was that if each film was kind of independent from the other, that's indeed the case, except with this one, which is Godzilla, Mothra, MechaGodzilla, Tokyo S.O.S, once again directed by Masaki Tezuka, and this film is the direct sequel from Godzilla against MechaGodzilla. So it's once again the same kind of spirit, the same kind of themes, with Godzilla wanting to destroy Japan, MechaGodzilla fighting against it. But then, of course, as the title implies, we bring some good old kaiju which are so appreciated from the series, in this case the iconic Mothra, and then that's it, we got a big fight in our hands. So it's always nice, of course, to bring Mothra into the mix because it's one of the most interesting kaiju from the Toho universe. But also we have to admit that there is something a bit repetitive to see the same pattern going again and again. So we already had that in the SA era when they brought back Mothra, they brought back the Shobijin, so all these kind of things. So here they do an update of that. There is nothing really surprising or original there. They are exactly as we expected. It's a nice familiarity, but at the same time it also makes it a bit repetitive and already some kind of deja vu feeling. And so that's the limitation of this sequel to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. This Tokyo S.O.S. has the same kind of quality as the previous episode in some really nice special effect scenes. The fights between the different kaiju are once again beautiful to watch, nothing to complain about here. There is also the main character from the previous film, so there is some kind of continuation. The qualities from the previous film are there, but there is not much more than that. So it makes for a good continuation if you have like in my case the previous film, but yeah, there won't be really anything new for you to get something different, and so yeah, pleasant film to watch. Nothing really to criticize, but it's just a bit generic and a bit predictable. And in 2004, for the 50-year anniversary of the Godzilla series, Toho decided to really go all out with this new Godzilla film, which was called Godzilla Final Wars, directed by Ryuhei Kitamura. So Ryuhei Kitamura, who had made a name for himself with the independent film, an independent action film Versus, and who had become around that time one of the most sought after director in the Japanese film industry. So they gave him the direction of this new big, very big Godzilla film. And indeed what Ryuhei Kitamura tried to do on this film was to really blend all the different aspects of the Godzilla series. So we have, of course, the Godzilla as we know from the 1954, but also we have some of the elements from the other parts of the Showa era. We have the return of Minilla. We have some extraterrestrials who are pretending to help the humanity, but who actually wants to dominate it by using the kaiju. We have all the different kaiju, almost all of them, who appeared in the previous installment, who are in the film in one way or another. At the same time, so it really tries to blend all the themes which had been the ones from the saga during the Showa era, which is already a pretty ambitious attempt there. And at the same time, Ryuhei Kitamura tries to also incorporate some of the trend of the time, so of the end of the 90s, early 2000s. So we have some kung fu scenes, we have a bit of Matrix-inspired costumes, equilibrium, this kind of influence, which are also added into the mix. And as you can expect, with so many different influences, the result is a giant mess in a way. But it's a giant mess which is fun to watch. You also have a lot of you have many new faces which are part of this end of the 90s, early 2000 in Asian cinema trend, which by that I mean it's a lot of former models, people who are very good looking, idols, but who are not necessarily either good for acting or good for fighting. That was the trend back then. Not the best trend in Asian cinema, in my opinion. And so you have a bit of that here. So you have a lot of very good-looking new faces who doesn't necessarily deliver the best performance, but at the same time you also have a lot of old timers. Akira Takarada, for example, is one of them. So people who had been into the Showa era, and so it's always nice to see them here. You have, as I said, almost all the kaiju from the Toho universe who are proud and who have some fight scenes, destruction scenes, with the special effects we can expect from the Millennium era, which is fairly high quality special effects, and indeed it makes for some pretty entertaining fights and destruction scenes. We have a very well-known critic, in a way, on the 1998 Godzilla version from Roland Emmerich, with the same design from this film, who is destroyed very quickly by this Millennium era design Godzilla. So it's always nice. So it's a lot of winks to people who like the Godzilla series, and it's almost impossible not to like it. I mean, it's a mess. It's not necessarily very. It doesn't make much sense sometimes, but it's fun. You have to admit that it's fun, and I think it's really personified by the choice of having Don Fry also in one of the leading parts. Don Fry, who is a former UFC fighter, a former Pride fighter, a regular also on the wrestling scene in Japan. If you have never seen his fight against Yoshihiro Takayama, I can only recommend you to type in YouTube Don Fry versus Yoshihiro Takayama and see one of the most incredible fight ever made in a ring. So having him here, I think in my opinion, it's great, because I like Don Fry. I mean, I think it's a lot of fun. And he has charisma, but he is not a good actor at all. He's really bad, actually. And so I think he really personifies the film. I mean, he's really good for posing. It's fun to have him here, but at the same time, it's pretty crappy performance. And so you have these two aspects which are constantly fusing in this Godzilla Final Wars. But in my opinion, it's a very fun mix. And if you have been following the Godzilla saga, maybe you will appreciate it less if you are just watching it in the early stage of your Godzilla retrospective or Godzilla experience. But if you have been through the different era, if you have seen quite a few of the Godzilla films, I think you cannot not appreciate this attempt at giving tribute to all what had been made during the Godzilla saga all over the decades. So for me, it was a very enjoyable experience watching it, and to this day I still have a lot of fun when I watch it. So I can only recommend it. But is it very well made, very well structured, and with very strong and deep thought themes? Clearly not. It's really just a big hamburger, very fat, but which will kind of make you satisfied after having eaten it. Unfortunately, Godzilla Final Wars, despite its fun aspect, was not the success that Toho expected. And given that they had put a lot of money in the film, that kind of put an end to the Godzilla Millennium era. And so after Godzilla Final Wars, we didn't get any Godzilla for 10 years until Hollywood took back once again the King of the Monsters and tried once more to do a new film, a new American film around him. And so we got in 2014 the second attempt, which is once again titled Godzilla, directed this time by Gareth Edwards. And so in this new version, we have a military guy whose mother has been killed in a nuclear catastrophe, a nuclear incident. And the father is convinced that it was not just an accident, it was the result of some kind of monsters, but which have been hidden from the press, hidden from the public. And so he's trying very hard to find clues which prove that his theory is right. And so the father and the son are going to investigate on this theory, and they will realize that indeed it has been hidden. Indeed, the accident was caused by a kaiju, and they will discover a society called a secret society called Monarch, who are kind of monitoring those kaiju. And so we will have the return of Godzilla, but also of another kaiju called the Mutos. So as I said when I was talking about the 1998 Roland Emmerich version, there is no need, in my opinion, for Hollywood to take over and to make it more serious or more legitimate than the Asian version. And most of the time, as shown with the Roland Emmerich film, the result is actually under the original film. But there are exceptions, and actually this Godzilla 2014 is, in my opinion, an exception, because indeed it's a very good Godzilla. And I guess that the difference and the fundamental issue, in a way, is not necessarily to do it in Hollywood, to bring more money, to bring more special effects. In fact, what makes a good film, whatever the original material is if you have a good director behind the screen, behind the camera. And Roland Emmerich, I'm sorry to say, he is not a very good director, while Gareth Edwards is much better. And so obviously, when you have Gareth Edwards in charge of a Godzilla, that brings a better result than when you have Roland Emmerich doing a Godzilla. And so this, the 2014 Godzilla, is much more respectful from the original material. There is of course some kind of update with the nuclear theme. So this time the nuclear incident in the introduction of the film is clearly some kind of a nod to what happened to Fukushima 2 years before, and that makes sense. That also put the film clearly with Japanese roots, which the 1998 version tried pretty hard to erase. So you can see there is much more respect in this version. There are also characters who are more compelling than the Roland Emmerich version. They are not perfect. I think the main military guy is a bit weak, and I think it would have certainly benefited if there were some better, maybe more prestigious actors. It's not, there is nothing bad about it in this version. It's just, I think, with either better actors or maybe slightly better work of development, I think it would really have been able to go one level higher and makes for a really, really great film. It's still a very, very good film, so it's really just a matter of small degree here. And at the same time, what makes the difference is the way Gareth Edwards composes his shots. There is really a very deep thinking about how to frame, about how to show the monsters, the kaiju, with the idea of trying to stick to a human point of view, which makes it very impressive when it comes to the scales. You have a lot of familiar way to look at it, and that highlight the horribleness in a way of the situation. I'm thinking, for example, here of the scene where you have the Muto fighting Godzilla in an airport, and it chooses to frame it through the hall where there are all the passengers. And so it's some kind of things you are kind of used to if you have been in an airport, this kind of the big windows, but then you add the element of surprise with this kind of giant monsters going against each others, and it's very effective. Is really good at that. There is really a talent from Gareth Edwards for doing this kind of scales. He showed it the same way in Rogue One, for example, and it is very efficient in this new Godzilla. The new design of Godzilla is also pretty good, and I think it's a good way to keep the original characteristic of the Japanese Godzilla, but also trying to bring something slightly new, and it makes for a very good update, much better than the 1998 version, obviously. I also appreciate the fact that they didn't just pick a kaiju from the Toho universe and decided to try to bring something new with the Muto, so this new kaiju who have a few surprises. The design is quite interesting. They make for good opponents to Godzilla, and Gareth Edwards is very able to play on those new kaiju very well by creating the atmosphere and the teasing necessary for us to always be curious about what they are going to do, how they are going to look. So there is really the right build-up in the story and visually in order for us to be constantly interested about what is going to happen to them and what is going to happen when they will confront Godzilla. I know there are a lot of people who complain about the fact that we didn't see enough of the kaiju, and there were not enough monster fights, basically. I'm not really following this idea. I actually think it was a very good thing that Gareth Edwards tried to do something different, tried to have his own point of view, his own originality. There have been a lot of confrontations between giant monsters in all the other Godzilla films, so it's good that here there is another way to do it, and I think that's actually one of the strengths of the film, and I think we have enough fights to be satisfied, and especially because there is this higher level of direction from him. So each time when you see them appear on the screen, it's really strong. It gives a very strong impression, and so even if the quantity may not be enough for some of them, I think the quality easily compensates. So in this case, I think less is more, and it worked very well thanks to the talent of Gareth Edwards. We also have a nice soundtrack by Alexandre Desplat. Not the best from the Godzilla saga, but it's certainly efficient. And so if you add all these together, I think it actually makes for one of the best Godzilla film ever made, and that's the guy who said we don't need Hollywood remake. We're saying that, so it really means something, I guess. And so yeah, in my book, it's a strong recommendation. I really think this Godzilla 2014 is a very good film. In 1998, after the failure of Roland Emmerich's Godzilla, it had convinced the Toho executive to restart their own Godzilla series, and it kind of did the same with the Gareth Edwards 2014 version. And so 2 years after the Hollywood Godzilla, we got another Japanese Godzilla in 2016, which is Shin Godzilla, directed by Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. So Hideaki Anno, quite well known in the world of anime thanks to his work on Evangelion. And so this new Godzilla is kind of, in a way, it's slightly similar to what Gareth Edwards did. It's kind of an updated version of the 1954 version, but instead of having the nuclear bombs from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's more linked to the effect of the Fukushima nuclear incident, and the orientation of Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi is clearly to act like Godzilla is a similar event, a similar disaster, but in order to highlight how incompetent in a way the Japanese government is to deal with such events. So by this choice, it means we have a lot of characters from the Japanese government. We have a lot of meetings and discussions which is going all the time in the film, and we also have, they also bring some elements linked to the political situation, the international political situation. There is a strong message, quite critical, against the American influence and presence in Japan. And the film was actually a huge success in Japan, and is quite unanimously praised all over the world, and considered to be one of the very best Godzilla ever made. As it is often the case with me, I'm afraid I'm not completely agreeing to this idea. So I have several problems with the film. One of the first problems I have is actually with Godzilla himself. As it is the case with each attempt to do a new Godzilla, they have reworked the design. So we have something new here. Godzilla, we evolve. He's like a giant chicken at the very beginning, and then it gets bigger and bigger until he reaches something a bit similar to what we know, but with a different design anyway. It's more rocky. And I don't really like this new design, and that's kind of a problem. I have a big problem actually with its arms. I hate these little arms he has there, very close to what we would expect from a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I think it makes it ugly. I'm sorry to say, I really have difficulty with these very, very small arms. I don't think it makes for a good design. It's a small complaint. I mean, it's not enough to make the film not interesting or anything, but when you are watching kaiju films, you need to have some kind of appreciation of the design. The designs of the monsters are important. They should not be underestimated, in my opinion. And so having a problem with it is already something which makes me less involved, less appreciative of the film. But it's not that important, I agree. And the main problem I have actually lies more about the tone of the film. So as I say, the idea from Higuchi and Anno is clearly to make fun and be critical of the Japanese government in the way it deals with disaster. And I think the intention is good, but the way it does is a bit in between. It's not that funny in the way they handle the situation, but as there is also this comedy aspect, which is part of it, it ends up being not that hard in its critique of the film. And the way it shows it, as I say, is with these endless meetings and discussion, which I think ends up fairly quickly quite boring. So I would have preferred if they chose to either do something clearly more comedy oriented or clearly more political critic oriented. And as it tries to do on both sides, and at the same time being a monster movie, I think it tries to run, it tries to chase too many rabbits at the same time, and at the end it doesn't manage to completely deliver on all the fronts. Be minded though that it is my opinion there, and it seems I am in the minority. A lot of people seems to appreciate it, but for me that's a problem. I find it a bit boring and not hard edge enough in its political message for me to fully appreciate it, even if it is a good intention and it is fairly new in the way the Godzilla films have been so far. So there are clearly some points for trying to do something different here, which has to be given to Shinji Higuchi and Hideaki Anno. They are also quite successful when it comes to the special effects sequence. Even if I'm not very fond of the design of Godzilla, there is no doubt that all the scenes where it's destroying the cities are very well made. The scenes with the military are also quite cool, much better than what we were used to have in the previous films with miniatures and this kind of things. Here it feels much heavy, it feels more real, the different military equipment being used against Godzilla, and that makes for some really nice scene. And of course there is the iconic atomic breath scene, which is no doubt one of the greatest Godzilla scene ever. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. When I watched it in theater, I was really impressed by this one. It also helps by the music being used, even if in some other scenes I think the music is a bit undermixed, which is a shame, because the composition is really good sometimes. I'm thinking of the track Persecution of the Masses, which is absolutely beautiful, but which is not really used as well as I would have hoped in the film. Back in the days also, so in 2016 when I saw it in the theater, I also had a problem with another message which is in the film, which was basically the idea that being too dependent on the US, Japan had to start a new military build-up. That was a message which was promoted back then by then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And that was a message I had a lot of difficulty with. I thought that Japan had been very successful in a way thanks to their peace-oriented constitution. And I'm a bit idealist, I guess. I think it's better for the world to have less military and less weapons. So, of course, I was a bit not that thrilled by the message from the film, and that was a problem for me back then. I'm saying back then because unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on which point of view you have, I've kind of changed my mind about that since there have been some increase of threats and military buildup in some other countries in the Asia Pacific region, and so if there must be some kind of war going on, I'd rather that Japan being a democratic country and having some fairly positive values, even if the Japanese democracy has a lot of problems, I think it's still much better than many of the other countries in the region. And so I rather see Japan being able to take its part if a conflict must arise in the region, on a defense value which I consider to be more positive than the one put forward by some of its neighbors. So yeah, I've evolved on that part, and so the message which bothered me in 2016, actually I think it does make sense now in a 2022 environment. So it's no longer a problem for me, but that's me who has changed. The film, it was saying that in 2016, it's still saying that, of course, nowadays. So it will depend on you if you find it relevant message or if you think it's not a good thing. But so this Shin Godzilla is certainly an interesting attempt. As I said, many people liked it. I'm less enthusiastic than many. I do think it has some qualities, but I really have a problem with the different weaknesses which I have already highlighted. So I would say make your own opinion. It's certainly worth a watch. Now we go back to Hollywood. Given that the Gareth Edwards 2014 Godzilla was a success, we got in 2019 Godzilla King of Monsters, directed by Michael Dougherty, which is a direct sequel from the Gareth Edwards version. So we still have Monarch, the secret organization monitoring the different kaiju. We have a scientist who has found some kind of device, invented some kind of device which is able to kind of control the kaiju. She's abducted by some kind of eco-terrorist organization who wants to reawaken the different kaiju which live on the earth, and this way kind of destroy humanity. And so Monarch is going to try to prevent that, and Godzilla as well. So with this film, clearly the criticism which had been addressed to Gareth Edwards 2014 Godzilla has been heard by the executives, the American executive, and they have decided to go kind of all out in the kaiju fights, confrontations, the kaiju porn in a way. And so while we had only 2 types of kaiju and a fairly limited number of fights in the 2014 version, that's certainly not the case here, as we got Rodan, as we got King Ghidorah, as we got Mothra, and they all end up fighting and destroying things in a fairly graphic way. So if you were not that thrilled by the approach of Gareth Edwards, this film should satisfy you much more. As I was thrilled by Gareth Edwards' approach, I'm less by the one of Michael Dougherty. Clearly, you have what you expect seeing a kaiju film, so you have a lot of those fights. You have pretty good special effects. I mean, they're all Hollywood quality, so nothing much to complain about. I think the redesign of the different kaiju is more hit and a miss. As usual with the Americans, they need to do everything more realistic, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. I think Rodan is okay. I think King Ghidorah is pretty good. But for example, I think it doesn't work at all with Mothra. So with Mothra, they have really made it a real insect, and that's not really the real concept of Mothra. Mothra is a force for good. It has this cute appearance, and that's really its main characteristic. If you make it a full insect, it loses a bit of its poetry and spirit. So I think it works much less. But in general, while this film is not badly made, it's not to the level of the Godzilla 1998. There is something lacking there. Not much of a theme. It just feels like they wanted to have a lot of kaiju fighting against each other, and that's pretty much it. And that's what you get, but you are never completely involved in the fighting, in the conflicts between the different kaiju, and so you end up watching the film slightly bored, I would say. On the characters, also sometimes there are some weird stuff. There is some kind of twist with the main scientist character, which doesn't feel very credible. So while it's not a great film, so while it's not a really bad film, it's really far from great also. It's decent to watch, but I think it's easily forgotten. And I think the main responsibility lies on Michael Dougherty. Is less good, basically, than Gareth Edwards. And so obviously his approach, while decent, is nothing really that impressive. So slightly underwhelming, slightly disappointing second installment in this second attempt to have a Hollywood Godzilla. And things keep decreasing with the third film from the American Godzilla franchise, which is Godzilla vs Kong. directed by Adam Wingard in 2021. I already talked about it in my everything, all the films of 2021 video, so I will try to do a quick sum up of that. I think, as I said, it's from one episode to the other, the quality decreased a little bit. So here we have human characters who are really not inspiring at all, who are either boring, either annoying. So we are getting back a bit more like the 1998 spirit, and I'm especially thinking about the conspiracy theory black guy who was really annoying. We have a King Kong who is way too humanized. It feels like you are watching a giant redneck, or your average idea of Americans. I mean, it's like he's scratching his butt when he's waking up. These kind of things. I mean, it's of course I understand they are trying to make it more like a reference point of view, and so this way we feel for King Kong and we are more involved when they are the fight with Godzilla. These kind of things, but I don't think it really works. I think there should be more respect and mythology in a way going on in the King Kong character than what is provided here, even if there are some glimpses of it with the idea of the hollow earth and these kind of things, which are some of the interesting stuff from the film, the exploration of the hollow earth. But the story is just never, you're never involved in it. Once again, like the previous installments, the special effects are very well made. You have the big destruction scenes, the big fight scenes, and there is not much you should complain about, but you are never, at least I was never really into it, and I always watched them half watching, half doing something else. The final, for example, sees Godzilla fighting against King Kong in Hong Kong. It should be a scene for me. I mean, having those two iconic kaiju battling against each other in the city I love and I live in, I should like it. But actually, I didn't, because as it is often the case with American films and most of the foreign production actually taking place in Hong Kong, they have tried to make Hong Kong even more cliche than it is, and the cliche of Hong Kong is having this kind of neon lights, which unfortunately for you, I'm sorry to tell you that there is less and less actually now in Hong Kong. And so they have taken the city, the Hong Kong island as it is. They have fairly been faithful to the geography of the place, which is kind of not that usual. So that's a good point there. But then they have added neon lights everywhere, and it makes Hong Kong even look very kitsch. That's what I call the American Chinese restaurant aesthetic, and that completely threw me off when I watched the fight on the film. I really hate this kind of makeover. It's like if you have a beautiful lady and you then add several layers on makeup on her, thinking that it's going to make her even more attractive. It doesn't. She's great as she is. Just let her be and then do your thing. But that's not what they did, and I think the result is quite frustrating, even if the scene by itself is fairly well done. And when it comes to the bad idea, I also think the incorporation of MechaGodzilla in this one is a bad idea. I've already stated many times that I love having MechaGodzilla in the Godzilla series, being this mecha used by the human in order to defend the Earth. But here they have changed it. They have put it the other way around, so it's the bad guys who are using MechaGodzilla. But they are just bad guys because you need bad guys. I mean, they are this kind of caricature typical of the Hollywood films, and you see that you need to dislike them, and it's just a way for the two main kaiju, Godzilla and King Kong, to unite and to have another character to beat, and so that you can say that there is no winner or loser in the original confrontation. It's just it's a trick which I think doesn't work here because of the choice of MechaGodzilla. I mean, we should root for MechaGodzilla, or you make it for a completely different kind of MechaGodzilla. I don't know. It's up to you, but I think it didn't work. The way they used MechaGodzilla, I think, was not convincing. The new design was not that great either, in my opinion. So yeah, a lot of disappointing elements, and a Godzilla series which, in my opinion, is going downhill with each episode. And this one actually was a fairly big success internationally, so we can expect some new Godzilla coming from the American franchise, and I'm expecting, if they keep doing what they do, and certainly they will, because that's what brings them money, most likely the next installment will be even worse. So I'm not really looking forward for any more American Godzilla. And to finish this retrospective, we have a 3 animated movie which were produced between 2017 and 2018. That is Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle, and Godzilla the Planet Eater, all directed by Hiroyuki Seshita and Koun Shizumo. So this trilogy of animated film, which was released directly on Netflix, is going for a very science fiction approach, which is one of its interesting characteristics. We have the kaiju destroying basically the world and destroying humanity, and so with the help of some extraterrestrial technology and a few extraterrestrial themselves, we escape humanity. What is left of humanity escapes Earth and is looking for a new planet to live. Unfortunately, they don't find one, and so they end up coming back to Earth, and with the idea of trying to put an end to Godzilla horrible rule. I really like all the science fiction aspect of the film, with the spaceship when we are on this kind of technology, the kind of robot they are using, this kind of material. I think it's a good idea to try to go in this direction. And the film has a lot of interesting themes, actually, about, for example, the idea that the environment adapts to Godzilla, the idea of kind of making peace with the hatred that you can have, and realizing that you may have been wrong in the things you believed in. There are actually some pretty strong ideas proposed in this trilogy. The problem which comes with it is that it's not expressed in a way which is pleasant from a watching viewpoint. So the film is a bit like the trilogy. I'm just dealing with the trilogy here. I'm not going to treat them one by one. It is never really enjoyable to watch. The characters are not that great, and the fact that they are also all in CGI doesn't help. This kind of CGI animation has made a lot of progress, obviously, since they did it with Appleseed. But there is still problems with the display of emotions, I think, in the characters. The dubbing artists try their best in order to bring emotions, but there's still limitations when it comes to what is displayed on the screen. They also look always a bit stilted. It's not very smooth. You are never completely engaged with them because of that. Sometimes it tries also to try too much, in a way, to do things differently. I'm thinking here, for example, of the apparition of King Ghidorah. The apparition of King Ghidorah actually is a beautiful scene. It's very interesting. But then you have the fight between King Ghidorah on Godzilla and you expect a big confrontation, but you have something which is actually where nothing happens. Basically, this new King Ghidorah bites Godzilla, and then the scene goes on forever and forever. There is a concept behind it which kind of makes sense, which is interesting from an intellectual point of view, but not interesting from a watcher, I mean from an audience. It actually makes for a fairly boring scene, and that's really emblematic of this trilogy. I mean, it's stimulating intellectually, it tries to do something different with the Godzilla material, and that's to its benefit, but it does it in a way which is never really thrilling or stimulating on an emotional level at the very least. And so it's a very frustrating experience actually watching this trilogy. I was constantly torn between it's boring and at the same time thinking but this idea is actually interesting, and always never know exactly how to digest it, how to take it. So I think for people who are really into Godzilla, I think it's worth a watch, because the viewpoint is quite different from what we got in previous installment. But if you are just a casual viewer and you want just watch good films, I'm not sure I would necessarily advise you to watch this trilogy. And as it is a trilogy, it also means you have more than 4 hours, 40 minutes of films to watch. So it can be pretty long for what it managed to deliver. And so that's it. We have finished this Godzilla retrospective. So about more than almost 70 years of existence for Godzilla, the King of Monsters. More than 20 films, I think around 20-30. So that's a big corpus. That's a lot of films to watch. And what is interesting when you do this kind of exercise is to realize that Godzilla is never really set in stone, and what made it able to sustain such a long time of existence, it's its ability to renew itself, to bring different things, even if sometimes some of the new things which are brought we might not necessarily like it, but I think that helped to for it to become such an icon and to keep existing for so long. So we had originally Godzilla being a symbol of the destruction of the atomic bomb and the trauma of the Second World War to Japan. Then it evolved into something more like a protector of Japan, a protector of the Earth. Then it became like the friends of Japanese kids. Then it became more like a symbol of natural disaster. So all these things, and also some kind of pop icons. All these things have been brought at some point or another in the saga, and that really helps Godzilla to stay relevant, whatever the time, whatever the generation of people watching it. And so that's really interesting to see this evolution, and that's what makes this kind of retrospective stimulating. As it is the case now, as it is the tradition on this channel, at the same time I will release this third and last installment of the Godzilla retrospective. I will have another video with my top Godzilla film, the 7 best Godzilla films. Of course, if you have watched the free video, you will most likely know who they are, but still have a look. I've tried to make a fairly entertaining editing on it. And I will see you very soon, hopefully on some other video about Asian cinema. Until then, keep watching new films, keep watching Asian cinema, keep supporting the channel and Asian cinema in general, and see you very soon.